Good morning, everyone. I'm Joy Oakes. I'm with the National Parks Conservation Association. We're the only national nonprofit membership organization dedicated to protecting and restoring the national park system. And with more than 50 national parks in the Chesapeake Basin, NPCA is very pleased to be involved in the Choose Clean Water Coalition because we understand that the health of these national treasures is forever tied to the health of the rivers and streams and the larger ecosystem in which they live and breathe. And we work to bring those who love the parks into these campaigns to choose clean water. And these people include, of course, park visitors, as well as business people whose communities benefit economically from park visitation. So for extra credit, okay, and make sure everyone's awake here before the congressman comes in, who can name a national park in the congressional 1st District of Virginia? Anyone know? Okay, people. Fredericksburg. George Washington birthplace would be one. Fredericksburg and Spotsylvania National Military Park would be another. Very good. Okay. Recently, I was flipping through one of my son's alumni magazines, and I was very pleased to see a profile of someone who graduated maybe a year or two before my son did from the Virginia Tech Corps of Cadets. Our next speaker, Congressman Rob Wittman. And for those of you who are familiar with Virginia Tech and the Corps of Cadets, which is the military school inside of Virginia Tech, you probably know their motto, ut prosum, which means that I may serve. And clearly, Rob Wittman has taken this motto to heart because his life has been about public service. He served at pretty much every level of government, from becoming a member of the Montrose Town Council, then serving as its mayor, and then the Westmoreland County Board of Supervisors, then chairman of the board. He was in the House of Delegates, where he was incredibly helpful when there was a threat to the citizen boards that review state permits on air and water. And he's been in the United States Congress since he won a special election in December 2007 after the tragic death of Joanne Davis. Before his election to Congress, he had a career with the Virginia Department of Health, and he served as an environmental health specialist and later as director, field director for the Division of Shellfish Sanitation. So you have particularly helpful insights into the urgency of cleaning up the streams and rivers throughout the basin and in the bay itself. And on top of that, he's a lifelong hunter and fisherman, although I understand you do some fishing right off your back deck almost, which is actually pretty cool. In Congress, Representative Wittman serves on the House Armed Services Committee and on the Committee on Natural Resources, where he serves on 2 important subcommittees, one of them the National Parks, Forest, and Public Lands Committee. And yours is a voice of reason and thoughtfulness, and this thoughtful approach, informed by science, has never been more critically important. I think we can all agree. This group is particularly appreciative of your efforts last year in the Natural Resources Committee and otherwise, your support for full funding for the Land and Water Conservation Fund during the Clear Act debates, because land preservation, okay, land preservation, yeah, okay. So our teacher this morning already told us where that fits on the spectrum of importance. Land preservation is one of the critical tools in communities using to choose clean water, and federal funding is a key role. We appreciate your reintroduction of the Chesapeake Bay Accountability and Recovery Act, one of many good bills that didn't quite make it across the finish line of Congress last year. And as we listened to you this morning, we're in the midst of analyzing what worked, what didn't work, what we want to do different this year, what our strategy should be moving forward. And we look forward to your advice, your counsel on how we can all work together in this room and outside of this room to make progress on our restoration goals and how we can save money and create jobs by choosing clean water. Congressman Wittman.
I'd say, Rob, that's enough. Let's take some questions. But, you know, I always tend to look at the glass as half full. You know, we obviously are in some challenging times, what I like to call resource-challenged times, to try to find the resources we need to get our waterways cleaned up. And that goes all the way from the little stream that runs behind somebody's house in Washington, D.C., all the way down to the mouth of the bay. But I will say this, there's no more critical time than now for us to make that happen. And there are lots of competing needs out there. And I think what we need to be talking about in order to be competitive in that realm is to relay to folks the value, the economic value of clean water. And there's so many different levels of economic value to that, whether it's in a community, whether it's the value to a little community having a nice clean stream running through their town, or whether it's to the watermen down the bay who can harvest more crabs, more fish, more oysters in a clean bay, wherever it may be, there is an economic value to that. And I would argue, too, that sometimes we get a little myopic about looking at the economic value of clean water, and that we ought to open up our thoughts and our scope of how we express the value of clean water. And we can look at it and say, well, what about the resources in the clean water? What about the fish, the living resources? And all those things are great. But there's also, I would argue, an intrinsic value to clean water, a value to people that maybe don't live on the shoreline, maybe the people that don't harvest the seafood there, but folks that live within a state or within a region. And what we need to be able to do is to look at innovative ways to say, okay, how can we, first of all, translate that value to others? And then how can we make sure that they are then looking at that as value and are either in their own way willing to trade a few of their dollars for that value or willing to fight to maintain that value? I think that's going to be critical going forward, is to expand that scope. And we've all thought about the immediate values that are there. But I would challenge you to look further. And when I chaired the Rappahannock River Basin Commission some years ago, we looked at how do we translate that economic value of clean water to others? And how do we get them involved? And the involvement can be at many levels. And I think that's going to be critical going forward in developing a new paradigm in how we garner the resources and the support to maintain clean water. Well, to maintain and preserve and to enhance our water quality, I would argue. So I'm going to urge you and challenge you to look at those sorts of things. There's some things out there, look outside the box. And I know there's been some efforts in the past to try to establish an economic value to efforts or to products that are water friendly or bay friendly. But I think that we can do more. I think there's some very innovative thoughts out there about how we can do that. In the realm of challenges within the allocation of public resources, we're going to have private resources that are available to bring to the table. We've got to find different ways to do that, and I am encouraged that there are a lot of folks out there that are looking at those things and that are trying these types of concepts at the micro level to see, hey, will they work? And will they work in certain communities? Will they work in certain ways? And talking about communities, I really think, too, that the long-term success of clean water efforts are going to be around communities, around smaller segments of population that have that direct association, again, with their region, with their waterways, and again, with the value associated with those waterways. And I would encourage you, too, just as you've seen here today, some great examples of efforts in those communities to look for other ways to engage people, to say, listen, let me tell you the value of a BMP here in this little parking lot. And by the way, Mr. Businessman, it would pay for you to go ahead and do that if you would be willing to change the way water runs off of your parking lot. I think there are a lot of different ways that we can do that. And I think in a lot of situations, if individuals were just, first of all, asked if they would be interested, second of all, if they were given the technical information about how they could do these things, I think all those things are critical to, again, involving more people in clean water efforts. And that, I believe, has to happen. If we're truly going to be successful in the long term, we have to expand that paradigm of clean water here. Not just in the Chesapeake Bay Basin, but I would argue across the United States. And those are ways to do it, to have very active community organizations in the little watershed that I live in Cat Point Creek there in Virginia, one of the most diverse watersheds in Virginia. In fact, when we went through there and did some studies, 38 different species of fish, just finfish, just in that one little watershed. We're only equaled by Dragon Run there in Virginia, so I always like to give Cat Point Creek a little blurb there. What we did, and I say we, is myself and several other members said, hey, listen, this watershed is so unique, and I grew up on that watershed. I grew up hunting and fishing on that watershed from the time I was big enough to walk. In fact, I remember getting tangled up in briar patches there trying to get down to the watershed, and my father telling me, son, don't cry, you're going to get out of that briar patch yourself. So, so I have enjoyed many hours there in that watershed, quite a diverse area. But it was something where a lot of people in the community had the same experience that I had and saw the value in that watershed, and we collectively said, hey, we ought to form a watershed committee. We ought to talk about what do we do to preserve this watershed. And we've had that conversation. We talked to a number of landowners there about conservation easements. Richmond County, one of the counties that has land in the watershed, is talking about in their comprehensive plan actually having conservation zones within that watershed. We did the same thing when I was there in Westmoreland County. So that, I think, is an example of some of the things that we can do at the local level to make sure that people understand the economic value and why it's critical in decision making to preserve that potential economic value that's there. And as we expand out of those watersheds and we look across the bay, we talk about creating jobs, and I would argue that a clean bay or a clean waterway is a job creator. And if you look there in Virginia, if you look at what has happened with the seafood industry through the years, and you see what can happen with a clean bay and with the development of efforts like aquaculture, I would say that that is a very exciting realm, things that are just beginning to blossom now. We've seen some efforts there with spat-on-shell aquaculture and other efforts that have been very successful initially and that have attracted a number of folks' attention and have attracted individuals' attention, those folks that have a piece of property on the bay, that have a dock, that are willing to tie up a couple of oyster floats there and put oysters in, or to put some shell on the bottom and buy some of these spat-on-shell oysters. It really is exciting to see folks in the community get involved, and now in Virginia, I think we're at about 8,000 individuals that in some way, shape, or form are involved at the micro level with some form of aquaculture. And I think that just is the tip of the iceberg. So again, looking at that economic value tied to the resources in the bay, and then when you involve people at that level, all of a sudden they have more than just a passing interest. You know, some of them now have an economic interest. Some of them now have a what I call a sweat equity interest. Hey, I put all this effort into growing these oysters. I want to see something happen with that. So I think there's a lot of ways to tie those folks in too. And those folks not only will be out there working in those areas, but then they also become advocates. They're the folks that will show up to the public hearings and tell the Board of Supervisors or the city councils, this is what you need to do to make sure that we limit runoff from parking lots and that we address the issue of non-point pollution because it's important directly to them. So the more of those things I think we can do, the more we relate clean water and a clean bay to economics and to economic development, I think the more successful we will be. And also at that point, I believe that if you are able to demonstrate success at that level, it's much easier to engage decision makers in governing bodies, whether it's city council, board of supervisors, House of Delegates, U.S. Congress, whatever it may be. That I think is critical. And then you have a much wider and broader array of folks that are going to be advocates, not just those folks that will subscribe and say, I'm going to send a letter, but those folks that are saying, I'm going to show up to a public meeting. I'm going to do something more. I'm going to write a very thoughtful letter to the governing body, to the decision makers here, and say this is what needs to be done, and not just in a general scope, but in a very specific scope about what they want to see done in their communities. And I think those are great opportunities for all of us to look at. And I can tell you there at the congressional level, I'm excited about this 112th Congress. As you've heard, just on Friday, I introduced the Chesapeake Bay Recovery and Accountability Act, which does a number of things. It looks at making sure budgets are transparent so we know where dollars are being spent, and making sure that we hold folks accountable for those dollars being spent, and make sure that we're demonstrating results. I think that those are critical elements of what we need to do to clean up the Bay. But we need to do more. I think there are other elements out there that I'm anxious to work with other members of Congress about, and that is making sure that we have water quality standards that are going to be met, that we aggressively pursue. I think there are lots of opportunities to do that. And again, looking at a wide array of efforts and opportunities to achieve those water quality improvements, I think that those things are extraordinarily important, and I look forward in this Congress to getting those things done. I know the last Congress there were a number of different efforts sort of running there in parallel. And I can tell you, I was there in conversations with a number of different interest groups, from folks in agriculture to the Chesapeake Bay Foundation and others, saying, hey, listen, let's bring these good ideas together. And both pieces of legislation there had great ideas in them. And I think we need to be putting that effort forward in this Congress to say, let's consolidate those great ideas, put them together, and say, that's going to be our blueprint for going forward to clean up the Bay. And again, you know, that has effects past the Chesapeake Bay. People look at that bill and they say, oh, it just involves the Chesapeake Bay. Well, really it involves more, because it sets the precedent. It sets the framework for how we're going to address water quality issues elsewhere. And we know that in the Bay, we've been attempting to be more aggressive than maybe in other areas of the United States. But I think this is a great opportunity for us to demonstrate that clean water, a clean Chesapeake Bay, is a nonpartisan issue, folks. It really is a nonpartisan issue. There is not a D or an R or an I attached to it. It's a nonpartisan issue. And what we need to do is to attract as many members of Congress that get it. And there are a number of them out there that get it. So we do more of that and say, hey, listen, here are ways that we can bring these different ideas together, that we can make sure that farming can continue. And farming is an important part of what we need to do in the Bay. And farming can continue in an economically viable way, while at the same time, farming being pursued in a way that cleans up our bays. And we all know that those are going to be challenges out there for us, and especially when we have a situation where we have population increases in the Bay through the years. There's going to be challenges there with local governments, but I am confident. I'm a glass half full person, folks. You will always find me eternally optimistic, even sometimes in the gloomiest of times, to say we can do this. And I have to go to Washington each and every day believing that. And some days I leave there going, can I wake up feeling that way tomorrow? But I do. And I ask each and every one of you in this room to do the same. We are in challenging times, no two ways about it, folks. But let me tell you, I look at that as a whole realm of opportunities for us, for all of us to think differently, to be able to convince and engage decision makers about how we can accomplish the same ends, but maybe by different means. And the means are out there. They really are. The means are there for us to clean up this Bay and to do it in a meaningful way. And I believe strongly that can happen. And it's only a matter of making sure that we get more people involved, and we get more people from top to bottom involved, and we convince them of the value that clean water and a clean Bay has to them individually. The more people we get there, the more successful we'll be. And we can do that, folks. There's more and more people getting engaged in this as I talk to folks that live in the watershed that now have some kind of connection to clean water and the value of the Bay. I'm convinced that we will have a coalition bigger than any of us can imagine, with folks that'll say, hey, I want a clean Bay, I'm going to stand up and fight for us. And as the old movie saying goes, I'm sick and tired of this and I'm not going to take it anymore. And that's what we need from folks out there. And I do believe that that'll happen. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today, to kind of give you an overview about some of the things that we're facing there in Washington. I'd be glad to take your questions, comments, ideas, and concerns, and I will do my best to answer your questions. And if I don't have an answer, I'll get one for you. Sir.
Two things. First of all, you are not my congressman,
Mm-hmm.
but you are my grandchildren's congressman. So I look to you,
Thank you
to keep that Rappahannock clean.
Yes,
please.
sir. Yes, sir.
The whole idea of bipartisanship, I'm from Maryland's Eastern Shore, and we don't have bipartisanship there. It used to be, we were talking at our table this morning, it used to be that it didn't matter what party you were in, if you were representing a shore area, a bay area. It was a bipartisan
Yes.
bipartisan issue. It is no longer, either at the state level or the federal level. What do you think can be done to change that, to bring that back? I mean, that was a wonderful thing that the legislators stuck together on that issue,
Sure.
but they don't anymore. It's unfortunate.
Well,
Any thoughts?
Sure. Well, we've worked very hard to try to make sure we engage other Bay watershed legislators, and we've been successful in that, in trying to convince them of the value, again, of a clean bay. They may have some differences in how to get there, but I always go to them and say, listen, this is a nonpartisan issue. Sometimes you get hung up on the details, and I have to tell legislators in my years of working on water quality that, you know, the details are not necessarily what's important, but it's the general mindset of people saying we have to first make the effort. And most everybody we get there agrees on that. I don't know of anybody top to bottom that says, yes, we need to clean the bay. So that's the common ground that we work from. And then from there to say, now how do we garner those different ideas out there? And that's where sometimes the legislators get hung up and say, well, yeah, I want a clean bay, but I absolutely don't want to see this done. Or if we do this, this is going to happen. I think we get too hung up in those details, and I think that's what happened this past time with the Chesapeake Bay bill. I think there was a lot of common ground there, and what we want to be able to do is to say, hey, listen, let's get those things done that we have in common and focus on those areas that we have in common, instead of sometimes focusing on the differences. And a lot of times people get so hung up, and what I have found out with individuals, especially decision makers, is they'll get hung up on something that is small and in many instances inconsequential to the outcome of what we're trying to achieve, but for some reason that's something that's a stall for them. So what we've got to do is to be able to get folks past that, and I'm looking forward to making sure that we have a very active coalition of legislators in the Bay in this 112th Congress, so we can go through the process of educating them and hopefully getting them past those points that they tend to see as stumbling blocks for them, and then it turns out sometimes to be a partisan discussion. And as soon as bay cleanup or clean water turns into a partisan discussion, all of us lose. And because then all of a sudden people start to put their walls up and say, well, I'm not going to do this, or I'm not going to do that, or this is one ideological way of doing it, or that's another ideological way of doing it. The ideology is this: clean water is an economic benefit to everybody, and it's something that everybody there ought to be in favor of. And I think there are ways that we can do that, and we've been encouraged with some at least preliminary conversations we've had with folks to be able to get some of those things done. But you have to be able to break those conversations down and be able to sort of get past. If there's something that an individual's hung up on, you have to say, okay, well, let's set that aside. Let's get back to the main discussion. If we do that, we can take a lot of that, what has sometimes turned out to be partisan discussion, out of that realm. I got time to take one. Okay, whoops. I'm being signaled that no, I have I have to get back. Well, listen, folks, thank you all so much. I really appreciate the opportunity. Please stay in touch with us. Let us know what we can do to help.
Thank you, Congressman.
Thank you
Hey,
so much.
congrats on being the Neighborhood County Board of Visitors Chair. It's very impressive.
Thank you. Yes, well, it's an honor to be
And I
here.
have to tell you, my college roommate, son, Dylan Colligan, working with
Good morning, everyone. I'm Joy Oakes. I'm with the National Parks Conservation Association. We're the only national nonprofit membership organization dedicated to protecting and restoring the national park system. And with more than 50 national parks in the Chesapeake Basin, NPCA is very pleased to be involved in the Choose Clean Water Coalition, because we understand that the health of these national treasures is forever tied to the health of the rivers and streams and the larger ecosystem in which they live and breathe. And we work to bring those who love the parks into these campaigns to choose clean water. And these people include, of course, park visitors, as well as business people whose communities benefit economically from park visitation. So for extra credit, okay, and make sure everyone's awake here before the congressman comes in, who can name a national park in the congressional 1st District of Virginia? Anyone know? Okay, people. Fredericksburg. George Washington birthplace would be one. Fredericksburg and Spotsylvania National Military Park would be another. Very good. Okay. Recently, I was flipping through one of my son's alumni magazines, and I was very pleased to see a profile of someone who graduated maybe a year or two before my son did, from the Virginia Tech Corps of Cadets. Our next speaker, Congressman Rob Wittman. And for those of you who are familiar with Virginia Tech and the Corps of Cadets, which is the military school inside of Virginia Tech, you probably know their motto, Ut Prosum, which means that I may serve. And clearly, Rob Wittman has taken this motto to heart because his life has been about public service. He served at pretty much every level of government, from becoming a member of the Montrose Town Council, then serving as its mayor, and then the Westmoreland County Board of Supervisors, then chairman of the board. He was in the House of Delegates, where he was incredibly helpful when there was a threat to the citizen boards that review state permits on air and water. And he's been in the United States Congress since he won a special election in December 2007 after the tragic death of Joanne Davis. Before his election to Congress, he had a career with the Virginia Department of Health, and he served as an environmental health specialist and later as director, field director for the Division of Shellfish Sanitation. So you have particularly helpful insights into the urgency of cleaning up the streams and rivers throughout the basin and in the bay itself. And on top of that, he's a lifelong hunter and fisherman. Although I understand you do some fishing right off your back deck almost, which is actually pretty cool. In Congress, Representative Wittman serves on the House Armed Services Committee and on the Committee on Natural Resources, where he serves on two important subcommittees, one of them the National Parks, Forest, and Public Lands Committee. And yours is a voice of reason and thoughtfulness. And this thoughtful approach, informed by science, has never been more critically important. I think we can all agree. This group is particularly appreciative of your efforts last year in the Natural Resources Committee and otherwise, your support for full funding for the Land and Water Conservation Fund during the Clear Act debates, because land preservation, okay, land preservation. Yeah, okay. Our teacher this morning already told us where that fits on the spectrum of importance. Land preservation is one of the critical tools in communities using to choose clean water, and federal funding is a key role. We appreciate your reintroduction of the Chesapeake Bay Accountability and Recovery Act, one of many good bills that didn't quite make it across the finish line of Congress last year. And as we listen to you this morning, we're in the midst of analyzing what worked, what didn't work, what we want to do different this year, what our strategy should be moving forward. And we look forward to your advice, your counsel on how we can all work together in this room and outside of this room to make progress on our restoration goals and how we can save money and create jobs by choosing clean water. Congressman Wittman.